Good morning, good afternoon, as we are connected with various time zones. And we are kicking out the first session in this conference. I am quite happy that we have a very leading panelist today. Very well-known people around us. Dr. Carlo Fadda, he is at the moment working as the Director of Bioversity International. Dr. Shantanu, who is a lead advisor at Global Engagement and Multilateral Relations at IFAD Rome. Dr. Darshan Shankar, whom I know for the last 20-25 years at least. He's the Vice Chancellor of Trans-Disciplinary Health Sciences University in Bangalore. Professor Venkatachalam, who is local person in Chennai with Madras Institute of Development Studies. And there are two persons who is presenting one presentation, Dr. Priscilla Marimo. She is a postdoctoral fellow from CGIAR institution in Kampala, from Kampala, Uganda, Bioversity International again. And Dr. Marlene Elias, again from Bioversity International. So the topic is quite not only relevant but also increasingly important because of three reasons I feel. One is there is a decreasing crop genetic diversity that we have been facing for the last 30 to 40 years, ever since the monocropping system has started into our farmlands. And secondly, increasing impacts of climate change is also creating quite an issue in terms of what crops to grow and what are the new perhaps crops and or varieties are going to shape in the next 20 years or so. I mean, there are also discussions on whether C3 plants continue or C4 plants should replace in, etc., etc. And finally, there is a trend, at least in South Asian context, that the people who have earned a lot of money in their early life is returning to agriculture. Although agriculture is now being considered as less remunerative occupation, but now it's increasingly taken up by the people who have earned quite a bit of money and wants to come and start developing kind of vocations which hitherto maybe 30 years before what we used to call as the traditional cropping. What traditional cropping nowadays is considered as, after Green Revolution, what we thought of the monocropping and with fertilizer responsiveness, etc. But now we are changing back to the agriculture where there is a diversity of crops, not only in terms of annual crops, but even in terms of biannual and tree crops. So, without much ado, I will see the panelists to take a shot on all these issues that we are looking at, particularly on the agrobiodiversity for strengthening resilience and sustainable food security. There are 3 or 4-pronged strategies one may have to adopt if we want to sustain food production and food security. And I'm sure each of you are addressing some of these issues in a very holistic way. First of all, this is an opportunity. I assumed this office quite recently, not even 3 weeks ago. So I'm still young for this institution, but I did work on agroforestry and agricultural issues in the past. So may I call upon Dr. Carlos Fadda, who is at the moment working as Director at Biodiversity International. And he has started his career in Vietnam, which is quite a nice country that I have seen once long ago. And he professes primarily the understanding conservation and use of genetic resources cannot be decoupled from rural development, livelihoods, and economics. So please, Carlos, go ahead and make your presentation. In the next 10 minutes, please, if you can limit yourself. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Am I able to share the screen? Can you see my screen?
Yes, yes, yeah.
Yeah, we can see your screen. Yeah.
Thank you. Just a second, let me. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so today, this is, first of all, thank you, and it's really a great honor for me to be on this panel. Very important topic, of course, and it's really, it's a great privilege. I'm, at the moment, I'm the research director of the Biodiversity for Food and Agriculture research area of the Alliance of Bioversity in SIAT, based in Nairobi, although at the moment I'm in Rome, spending my summer here. So let me start with some of the issues that are really important and why agrobiodiversity is important and why it is important to mainstream it. The world is getting food insecure. That was already mentioned before. There are issues of climate change. There are a number of issues that prevent people to go to sleep well fed. And that of course, it's something that needs to be addressed also because population is growing fast and it will reach very soon 9 billion. But it's not only about the amount of food that one eats. Is also the malnutrition aspect. People don't eat the right food. They don't eat quality food. They lack micronutrients that make their development compounded by this lack of micronutrients. That was mentioned is climate change. Is very important aspect of today agriculture. Is changing very fast, and really we don't. And it's really important that crops and it's are well adapted. Now, agriculture started 10,000 years ago, and a lot of climate change happened during those 10,000. So agrobiodiversity has the traits that make these traditional varieties as well as minor crops well adapted to this changing climatic conditions. And then, of course, there is an issue of environment, conservation of landscapes and biodiversity. The way food is produced today is not sustainable. It is creating soil degradation. It is creating loss of biodiversity, not only agrobiodiversity, but in general biodiversity. Encroaching into natural areas lead to extinction. And a lot of authors are now talking about a 6 max extinction. And while the previous one were naturally induced, this one is really led by humans. So let me start by sharing some some perspective. Lamberts indicated that there are, because I think the whole issue of agrobiodiversity is really related to the type of use that we want to do with the crop. And that, of course, is very much linked to crop improvement. Lamberts indicate 4 different types of breeding. One is community-based, and that is a type of breeding that relies a lot on traditional varieties. It's led by community needs, and the community themselves are part of a process of identifying which crops and which varieties are most suited for their local conditions. A second one is ecosystem-based breeding. This doesn't look so much into people interest, but it looks into local adaptation, how different crops and varieties are well adapted to different ecosystems and different growing conditions. So it's a kind of trait-based type of breeding, and that's why it's called objective. It's an objective way of identifying suitable crops and varieties. The third one is corporate-based breeding. That is really looking into, it's the, if you want, the mainstream approach where corporates decide the type of traits, I mean, in a kind of linear value chain or market chains where seeds and varieties are linked to the final users and the final products, and the characteristics are basically indicated by corporates. And then trait-based breeding, which is also a kind of reductionist because it looks at specific traits for adaptation to a specific challenge, may be pests and diseases or or abiotic stress. So these four are making different use of biodiversity and agrobiodiversity. Community-based breeding and ecosystem-based breeding are the two that looks into greater use of agrobiodiversity. Corporate-based breeding and trade-based breeding reduce the amount of agrobiodiversity that's used. Now, if we want to mainstream agrobiodiversity, I mean, first of all of these are somehow useful. Trade-based breeding relies a lot on genomic revolution, and it's therefore a very advanced way to identify traits for adaptation. Ecosystem-based breeding could be very relevant as well for people living in marginal areas, and community-based breeding explicitly accounts for the farmers' needs, farmers' rights, and the importance of farmers getting the seeds that they need. And if one wants to reconcile, and if one wants to make greater use of agrobiodiversity, you need to integrate somehow this different approach. But that requires a lot of change. It requires a change in attitude. You need to create a greater corporate social responsibility in the way companies are managing seeds and products. It needs to create circular economy and true cost accounting. And when I say true cost accounting, it really relates to how much the externalities are taken into account in the way we produce food today. And of course, because policies today are not really moving into that direction, then you need also to develop fair and green policies. You need to you need to change the attitude, but you also need to move from attitude to action. So you need to develop the right knowledge, tools, and approaches to allow for this different breeding mechanism, and therefore this greater consideration of agrobiodiversity to be included. You need to develop novel breeding strategies and tools that account for not only corporate-based breeding or trade-based breeding, but consider the importance of the ecosystem-based breeding and community-based breeding as well. And you need to develop a novel type of entrepreneurship that takes more into account the corporate social responsibility and the green policies that we've seen earlier. And at the end of the day, what we want is from this system-based breeding, we want this system to deliver food security, safety, and quality. We need to create food and seed sovereignty, where communities and people are in control of what they produce and what they eat. It creates social justice because it addresses issue of poverty for local communities. It conserves and make greater use of agrobiodiversity. It enhances the provision of ecosystem services as a replacement for external inputs, and it creates systems that are more climate robust, more resilient, and better adapted to this change. So if you want to mainstream agrobiodiversity, it's really important that you create a significant shift in the mindset of people and the way people can see how people see the crop improvement process. So where is the genetic diversity, and what can we do? We need to know what we have, and genetic diversity is in the gene banks, as we know, is in farmer fields, and you need to characterize it. You need to know what is in there. And also we need to know, if you want to take into account farmers' perspective, we need to know what material is locally adapted, what is more important for nutrition. And here I'm talking of genetic diversity of major crops like wheat, rice, etc., but also minor crops that are important for nutrition and that have been not well considered for breeding purposes. And so we need to know the various uses of these, and we need to also build on farmers' knowledge. These crops are well known by farmers, and therefore their knowledge, also in relation to the environment in which these crops are going to be grown, it's also very relevant. So it's important that we have participatory approach that ensure that use of traditional varieties, and we need to have a strong documentation of it, because only knowledge can allow to have those shifts in attitude, action that we've seen before. If we don't know it, we cannot get it. So one way, for example, to do it is through the Seeds for Needs approach. That is a rapid approach that identified crop varieties that are adapted to changing climates and markets. It uses existing diversity. It makes great use of molecular data as part of the strategy, and it can be customized to local and marginal conditions around the world because the farmers are part of the decision-making process. So everywhere you go, you can ask farmers what they need, and this approach can be well adapted to these different conditions. And in fact, it has been widely implemented in India as well. It's a very simple project. You have a broad set of varieties which is evaluated. And what is really important is that these are varieties that are found in national gene bank. One of the main issues is that there is very little characterization of varieties in gene bank. There is a lot of concern about conserving them, but very little concern about the use. And for you to use them, you need to know it. So there is a need to characterize those varieties. You then ask for, so the broad set of varieties being evaluated includes morphological, it includes molecular, and it includes farmers' evaluations. Once the best
Carlo,
varieties
2 more minutes, please.
Yes, once the best varieties are identified, they are given to farmers. Farmers test them under different conditions. There is an approach on how this is managed to a mobile app. And finally, the feedback is given and seeds of the preferred varieties are produced. So, for example, in Ethiopia, we released 2 varieties. We developed over 6,000 lines. We produce a nice QTL mapping for a number of traits that is for wheat and barley. We use crowdsourcing and innovative crowdsourcing approach, and of course, very gender sensitive. And when we start knowing these varieties, we found out that traditional varieties are superior in a number of traits to improved varieties. On this table, you can see that for days to maturity, biomass yield, and grain yield, there is always land races that are superior to improved varieties under the conditions on which these varieties are grown. And you can also see that you can get a lot of information from the genetics. Here, the case of durum wheat, and you can see that the Ethiopian durum wheat is genetically very diverse from material of Mediterranean origin. And all of the improved varieties that were released in Ethiopia are released out of Mediterranean origin. And therefore, it's really important that this material from Ethiopian origin, which is supposedly very well adapted to local condition, is also productive, as we've seen earlier, is included in the breeding process. Okay, this is a bit too much because of the time. So we did a QTL mapping. We identified a number of traits, for example, for the spike, which is related to yield. And we also had farmers participating into this exercise, so we could find, and maybe I can expand a little bit more if interesting in the Q&A session, but farmers can also identify specific traits that can be mapped as QTLs in the genome. So, for example, breeders could find 30 putative QTL controlling mentic traits, and farmers could find 124. And 20 QTL were jointly identified. So farmers can identify a lot of the putative QTL controlling mentic traits, and then there are many more that farmers can see. We released 4 varieties of barley and 2 of durum wheat with this method. And this is the digital platform that is used with the crowdsourcing. The crowdsourcing is basically shifting the participatory selection from having a centralized fields where farmers join and check how varieties are performing by distributing 3 varieties to each of the farmers participating in the experiments and asking them to grow under their own conditions. And so these provide a much more in-depth understanding of the farmers of the different varieties, and therefore the evaluation is much more significant. And this is a platform that is used to manage the experiment. And then, of course, you need to make these varieties available to improve seed system, for example, seed cooperatives, community seed banks, local seed producers, etc. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carlo. It's very nice, and you touched upon various issues of how to mainstream agrobiodiversity, particularly involving the farmers, and also how scientists and farmers can get together to look at what are all the necessities and what what sells best for the farmers. This is excellent. Maybe we will, I didn't find any questions in the chat box, so I'll wait for a little more time so at the end of this we can take some questions. Is that okay with you?
Sure, yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thanks so much, and may I call upon Dr. Shantanu Mathur. Shantanu Mathur is the lead advisor in global engagement and multilateral relations at IFAD, and he has worked at several institutions and at very senior positions at IFAD, Grand Secretariat, and Global Forum for Agricultural Research, and also in INBAR. May I request Shantanu, please?
Thank you very much, Chair. Can you hear me? Yes, I suppose. Thank you, and thank you, Carlos. That was excellent. I'll try and complement your presentation and also some of the key messages that Dr. Murali was also talking about earlier, but I will be coming at it, of course, from a development practitioner perspective. So let me also start by saying it's an honor and pleasure for me to participate in this annual consultation, especially as this one marks another milestone birthday of Professor M.S. Swaminathan. So let me start at the outset by wishing him many, many happy returns of this day. And while I'm at it, I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Professor Swaminathan for his global leadership in championing this important thematic area of agro-biodiversity, among so many other issues of global significance which he has promoted tirelessly during his very long, iconic and illustrious career. Allow me to recall that even as far back as in the 70s and 80s, and not long after the Green Revolution days, Professor Swaminathan had already pioneered and was promoting the importance of systems approaches when the global agricultural research system was focusing on top-down, single technology-led approaches. He was already promoting a multi-stakeholder perspective to food security and nutrition problems as the first chair of the Committee on World Food Security. It was a perspective that required interdisciplinarity and a multi-stakeholder lens, an approach which we are trying hard to better understand and adopt today in the implementation of the 2030 agenda. I'm not sure who is in the audience today, but for those of you who are not familiar, the International Fund for Agricultural Development is the only UN agency which is also an international financial institution. I've had the privilege of working at IFAD for over 3 decades, and I can tell you that IFAD embraced his vision of supporting truly participatory innovation systems back in the late 80s itself. And so Professor Swaminathan has been a strong influencer in this respect. In the context of today's topic, I have to confess that initially our approach of addressing environmental sustainability was quite simplistic, even a bit romantic, I would say. It was all about arresting ecological degradation in a top-down manner by basically conserving biodiversity, not as a means to support life, but as an end in itself. So we promoted protected areas and buffer zones to help maintain biodiversity, but forgot that many of these are also essential to maintain the very livelihoods of local communities who depend on it. So in recent times, we've become much more savvy in relating these biophysical functions to what I would call a dynamic, in situ, people-centered approach. It was about getting a deeper understanding of their incentive structure in managing risk and strengthening the resilience, especially of resource-poor farming systems. So, Mr. Chair, within the context of the big global challenges afflicting us today, I view this consultation as a rather timely reminder of how the entire global community needs to recalibrate its efforts to transform agricultural food systems and to make them much more inclusive, more productive, if you like, more resilient and sustainable. And of course, the smart and sustainable use of biodiversity is a key ingredient of such a strategy. Even back in 1992, the CBD had recognized that it is very much about people and our need for food security, medicines, fresh air, clean and healthy environment, and so forth. I do not need to remind this audience that, excuse me.
But it's too early, it's not even 15 days, Padma.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, please.
Because somebody was on the line.
Please go ahead. Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So let me say a few words on the importance of indigenous knowledge systems in this context. The knowledge and practices of smallholder farmers and indigenous peoples represent an untapped repository in global efforts to make agriculture more resilient to climate change. But those local informal knowledge systems are not adequately recognized. Dr. Fadda reminded us of that, which is why we continue to use terms such as neglected and underutilized species. These NUs are actually amazing drivers of sustainable utilization of biodiversity. They're in fact neglected by the formal science community and not by the rural communities at all. The farming communities have actually been protagonists in the sustained productivity of biodiverse agricultural ecosystems, if you like. It is because of their efforts that agricultural ecosystems continue to provide habitats for many wild and animal species, crop and animal species. However, we also know that the biodiversity of ecosystems is under increasing pressure worldwide. The Millennium Ecosystem Assessment reports that about approximately 60% of key ecosystem services are degraded already. Just under 1,000 species of cultivated plants are under threat globally. Some 75% of crop diversity has already been lost in the last century. And we know that today some 15 crop plants only provide 90% of the world's food energy intake. This is rendering the global food system highly risk prone and by default, a highly precarious system and vulnerable to shocks. And as Professor Fadda also mentioned, the type of modern agriculture that we are pursuing these days, it's one of the most significant drivers of biodiversity loss, in fact, through land conversion, monoculture, excessive use of inorganic chemical pesticides, etc., etc. Mr. Chair, from a pure technology perspective, we must continue to develop and test and validate with farming communities the full range of sustainable land management technologies. A wide range of agroecosystems across the globe to restore healthy soils, vegetation, and biodiversity. We have a rich technology shelf. Dr. Fadda talked about some. We have crop rotations, fallowing, intercropping, nitrogen fixing crops, agroforestry, etc., etc. And in the interest of time, I won't list them all, but move very quickly to coping strategies that farmers use to manage climate risk. Leading edge science can help us with robust new genetic material, building from ex situ sources that can help improve resilience, maybe to hotter and drier climate. But how does the farmer's incentive structure cope with climate variability and the uncertainty and unpredictability that comes with it? Judicious use of biodiversity can come to the rescue and give farmers options to manage climate risks. For instance, farmers may respond to rainfall variability by sowing different varieties of the same crop species as a risk-averse crop diversification strategy. On missions with FAO and the erstwhile IBGRI, Dr. Fadda will remember, now the powerful BI and CIAT alliance, I went all over Southern Africa and have personally met farmers who were planting up to 11 different varieties of maize. So the local knowledge systems and an adapted portfolio of crop options or varietal choices can help alleviate crop losses or total crop failure, and farmers can then avoid total hunger. Agricultural biodiversity is also highly beneficial for diverse and more balanced, nutritious diets, as was mentioned earlier. Different foods grown in homestead farms, typically managed by women, this is important, have different nutrition profiles and can help communities with much needed nutrient-rich dietary diversity. Efforts to conserve biodiversity must be reconciled with its sustainable utilization, matching it with human needs, risks, and incentives. This is a challenge that demands more innovation and community-based solutions tailored to local circumstances. By integrating agricultural biodiversity smartly within the food production systems of the future, we would be onto a win-win strategy, one in which we could improve productivity.
Sir, another minute more.
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Just a minute. And we will be able to improve nutrition, livelihoods, respond to environmental challenges, and deliver food security all at the same time by addressing the trade-offs that we were talking about earlier. In closing, I must say that I had the good fortune of attending many talks by Professor Swaminathan over the years. In one international conference on sustainable development in Rome back in the 80s, he was already talking about an ecosystem approach, which considered the farm within the entire food system ecology and the landscape it was nested in. He was talking about discarding the narrower concept and context of farming systems research, but embracing the rural systems research corresponding to the entire rural space and its nexus with urban space and with value chains cutting across these spaces and landscapes. Soon after that, Professor Swaminathan also embedded his Evergreen Revolution concept and its associated biodiversity and agroecological sustainability dimensions within this truly holistic approach. And it is this vision that
You are not audible now. His audio has some problem.
Yeah, audio is not coming.
Dr. Shantanu, something wrong with your audio?
Can you
Okay.
Hello,
Come
sir.
again?
Can you replug your microphone? Just to replug your microphone.
It is not clear now.
Sir, your mic is in unmute here. That's no problem. You just replug your microphone. Just reconnect it.
No.
live. Can you check your audio settings in left side bottom? Left side bottom. One mic symbol is there. In that which shows it's mute or unmute.
No, we can't hear you.
Sir, we can't hear you, sir. Sorry.
So sorry, Shantanu, I think we should move on. Is it okay with you? Okay, thanks. Thank you. There are some questions, perhaps I will pose it later. And next I move to Darshan Shankar. Professor Darshan Shankar is from FRLST TDU University. He is Vice Chancellor currently. And he has been working on the issues of traditional health systems and for very, very long, and he has been awarded Padma Shri for his relentless work on, mainstreaming the traditional health systems and also making it available for other systems to work on it, such as the allopathic. So, may I request Darshan Shankar?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I should say good day to everybody, because we don't know the time frames from which different people are located. So good day to everybody. It's a real privilege always a real privilege for me to be participating on a platform of the Swaminathan Foundation. I have such a lot of respect and I owe such a lot to Dr. Swaminathan. I won't, because of the shortage of time for this entire conversation, I'll only spend maybe half a minute, that the first time I met Dr. Swaminathan when I was just 22. And I used to work in the Bombay University, and I walked into the Ministry of Agriculture unannounced, seeking his help for some, agricultural program that the University of Bombay wanted to promote, and a kind of a program where students would apply knowledge to help farmers. And I never knew Swaminathan, Dr. Swaminathan before that. And to cut the long story short, within 5 minutes of my entering his office, I left the office with 5 letters addressed to vice chancellors of all the agricultural universities in the state of Maharashtra, requesting them to help the program that I was engaged in. I have never seen that kind of a quick response from any secretary to the government. And that too from somebody who just walked into his room, Anyway, so I have great respect, and it's a great privilege for me to be speaking on a platform that is hosted by the Swaminathan Foundation. Now, I am going to talk about the interface between food and health. And you will see in my title, there is a word transdisciplinary. And I may spend half a minute clarifying, what is the meaning of this term, transdisciplinary. We are familiar with interdisciplinary. We are familiar with multidisciplinary. And so what is transdisciplinary? And so transdisciplinary really is knowledge which is cross-cultural. And some of the speakers have talked about indigenous knowledge. Well, if you go into the depths of indigenous knowledge, particularly in a country like India, then it's not only practice that is involved in indigenous knowledge, there is a great deal of theoretical foundations that are involved with indigenous knowledge. And in respect of food, there is a whole pharmacology, an indigenous pharmacology documented in thousands of textbooks on indigenous pharmacology that is called Dravya Guna Shastra. And of course, you have texts on Krishi Shastra and so on and so forth. So unlike many countries where indigenous knowledge is only an oral tradition, in India, it's a codified tradition. Next slide, please. So as I said, this is going to be the interface between food and health. And the idea that I want to put across is perhaps a new idea, and that is, can we in the 21st century look at a strategy for not mass production? Of course, mass production is needed, high production is needed, but mass personalization. That's a very difficult program, mass personalization. We know at the frontiers of biology, modern biology, nutrigenomics and so on and so forth, that if you were to ask, what is the best food for me? The real answer you will find at the frontiers of nutrition will be that the best food is individualized, has to be personalized. You cannot have a general formula of so many calories, carbohydrates, fats, proteins, etc., as suitable to everyone. Ideally, food has to be personalized. Now, can you do mass personalization? You may be able to do personalization for a few individuals, with experts sitting around. But can you have a strategy for mass personalization? And that's the challenge of the 21st century, mass personalization of food. And so we are looking at the interface between food and health. Now, of course, food is the most important resource for health because it is the most low-cost solution for unmet health needs because it's consumed daily by millions. And yet, from a health perspective, a health science perspective, food is the most neglected resource. Current policies on agriculture and food production are only targeted largely on uniformity and high yield. Commercial enterprises engaged in food select also uniform foods, and the processed products that they make only concentrate on sensorials and stability of the product rather than its nutritional value. So the food that is now being produced is uniform. It's not necessarily the most nutritious food that we are consuming. Even the processed products are not processed with technology that can sort of enhance their nutritional value. And we know from so many studies that poor food quality is indeed the cause of a lot of health problems, a lot of chronic diseases, whether it's diabetes, cardiac disorders, even cancers, are all related to poor quality of food. Next slide, please. Thus, there is an imperative need for innovative strategies to strengthen the interface between food production and selection of food varieties and health. And I don't think that the modern science and nutrition or agricultural system can on its own achieve improvement in the quality of food. You probably need integrative, transdisciplinary or cross-cultural strategies to make food production diverse, nutritious, and even to make processed food healthy. Selection of species is very important. There are just so many varieties. I mean, just to give you a simple example, in Tamil Nadu, where Swaminathan Foundation is located, we know of iron-rich rices. So simply rices, which have iron content, which is good enough that, if you were to promote such rices in suitable ways, you could tackle the problem of iron deficiency. Of course, we know a great deal about now about organic methods. The practice is still not up to the scale it should be. We know that food needs regional variation. Speakers earlier have spoken about this, farmers, varieties, and involving farmers in breeding and selection, ecosystems, and so on and so forth. And of course, there is really a possibility of processing technology where you can retain nutritive values. So we need these innovative strategies. Next, please. There is also a huge civilizational loss taking place in food resources, because no matter what we may say and no matter what kind of limited researches are going on, there are literally thousands of ecosystem-specific foods of nutritional value that are neglected and getting lost. I remember my interaction with Dr. Richaria, who was a rice specialist, and he talked of, over 100,000 rice cultivars that were available in this country. And today, just look at the number of rice cultivars that we use globally. You will nowhere reach the total of the actual existence of ecosystem-specific rice varieties that existed. in national institutes like the National Institute of Nutrition. The library on food consists of around 500 entities, some of about 270 of plant origin and 230 of animal origin, but 500 food varieties in a national database on food is far short of the actual foods that are known even to the people of India. And I'm sure country by country, if one looks at the kind of foods that are being consumed by communities across the countries, across continents, you will find that, you know, we are really losing out on thousands of ecosystem specific foods. In Ayurveda, which is a codified system, and here one is talking of Ayurveda with reference to food and with reference to food pharmacology, we have in literature, we have documented at least 1,000 varieties of food ingredients that are consumed in tradition. Now, why should these not be there in national databases on food? And outside of NIN, outside of even the Ayurvedic literature, if you look at undocumented foods that are being consumed by ethnic communities, then the number of foods is several fold higher than, you know, just 1,000 varieties in Ayurveda or 500 varieties that are ingredients that are.
Darshan, another 2 minutes.
Okay, next slide, please. So really the challenges of the 21st century, and this is my last slide, is restoring the diversity of food, overcoming the limitations in nutrition of food chemistry. Today we use food chemistry to assess the food value. Food chemistry influences nutrition, but it does not translate into nutritional values because of the genetic, metabolic variability that is there and physiological variability that is there in consumers. And therefore we need to create a new, this is a global challenge, we need to create a new nutrition database which is cross-cultural, that combines food chemistry in Indian context with Ayurveda phenotypes, where it has been shown that the phenotypes correspond to genotypes, and the properties of food as given in Ayurveda pharmacology. I'm sure in other countries there'll be knowledge systems of similar nature in their own cultures. We need to use artificial intelligence and machine learning, which can power mass personalization of nutritious food when you combine food chemistry with Ayurvedic phenotypes, which correspond to genotypes, and Ayurveda pharmacology. So this is multidisciplinary or transdisciplinary, it's cross-cultural. And India indeed is in a unique position to design and execute a mass personalization program for food. This is a new agenda that we need to put onto the global stage. Mass personalization of food, because nutritional science today tells you that the best food for you has to be individualized, has to be personalized. And the challenge is, how do we do it? And how do we do it on scale? So I close my talk here. Thank you.
Thank you, Darshan. That's totally in a different tangent, and it's quite useful for all of us. Thank you so much. May I request Professor Venkatachalam? Venkatachalam is from the Madras Institute of Development Studies. I think since 2015 he has been with the MIDS, and prior to that he was with the Institute of Socio-Economic Change in Bangalore, and he also has led several programs with World Bank on water resources consolidation projects, and also on Ministry of Environment and Forests on issues related to environment economic components. So may I request Professor Venkatachalam?
Thank you, Dr. Murali. Good afternoon to all of you. I'm very happy to be part of this virtual consultation conference being held to celebrate the birthday of Professor MSS. So I'm basically going to talk about something that is very important, that is highly interconnected with the agricultural development, food security, and human well-being. So, we have been talking about different types of, negative impact on the biodiversity and so on and so forth. But we have not been able to quantify the impact of various kinds of negative externalities on biodiversity. So I'm going to illustrate how the negative impacts on the wetland ecosystems in general and biodiversity in particular are being inflicted by various kinds of negative externalities, and what is the size of this impact, and what we have to do in order to minimize these impacts in the coming years. So basically, I have taken wetlands. Wetlands are small water bodies. Basically, the depth does not exceed 6 meters from the sea level, but the water may be of both fresh, brackish, and wetlands do include varieties of small water bodies, and they are extremely rich in terms of biodiversity, as well as they generate varieties of ecosystem services. They are contributing directly and indirectly to enhancing human well-being. So basically, agriculture, rural development, and livelihoods of the poorer people depend largely on how these small water bodies, like the wetlands especially, are being effectively managed in the coming years. And therefore, even in Tamil Nadu, for example, the wetlands atlas has been prepared in the year 2010, which suggests that there are around 42,000 or 43,000 wetlands across the state contributing towards agricultural development and rural livelihoods. But unfortunately, the current studies suggest that there are only around 22,000 wetlands which are functional, but still experiencing various kinds of problems like siltation, dumping of the liquid waste, dumping of solid waste, encroachment, occupation of invasive species, and so on and so forth. Even though we have 43,000 wetlands generating varieties of ecosystem services in the past, now we have only very limited number of them, only half of them. And these even existing wetlands are also found to be non-functional because of varieties of negative externalities. So as a result, what is that we are losing? So that's the focus of my talk, actually. Of course, from the literature, we find that wetlands provide provisioning services like food, fiber, drinking water, and so on and so forth. Regulating service, they do regulate varieties of things like groundwater regulation, climate change, global warming kind of, mitigation, and varieties of, flood regulation, so on and so forth. And they also generate cultural services and supporting services like biodiversity. So there is a long list, indeed, of these ecosystem services. They are all highly valuable to the society. Indeed, in rural areas, most of the people are dependent largely on the ecosystem services coming from the wetlands. But these ecosystem services are not being traded in the markets. Okay, the food consumed for, the fish consumed for subsistence purpose, the water being used for drinking purpose, all these kinds of services, they are highly valuable, but they have not been adequately recognized because of the fact that these ecosystem services are not traded in the markets and they do not fetch any market price so as to understand the true economic value of these ecosystem services. As a result, what is happening? All wetlands are becoming wastelands. And that is the reason why we have in Tamil Nadu, for example, lost 50% of the wetland that prevailed some 15, 20 years back. And therefore, the economic values do play an important role in protecting the wetlands, protecting the biodiversity harbored by the wetlands, and then the agricultural system and rural development. So, so what we have done is that we have tried to estimate the economic values of the ecosystem services and the economic values of loss of many of the ecosystem services in terms of monetary units actually. So we have used certain standard methods, namely benefit transfer method, which utilizes the already estimated global values by various kinds of researchers in different country contexts.
Sir, another 2 minutes, please.
Yeah, maybe, so the global values have been used to estimate the ecosystem services of 141 prioritized wetlands in Tamil Nadu. These wetlands were identified by the Salim Ali Center for Ornithology and Natural History. These prioritized wetlands are rich in biodiversity as well as in terms of different ecosystem services. I don't want to go deeper into how did we convert these global values into local values in order to estimate the ecosystem services of these 141 wetlands because of scarcity of time. So as far as the coastal wetlands are concerned, we have 5 larger coastal wetlands which altogether generate around 10,336 or 10,337 crores per annum. And then we have 135 freshwater wetlands, inland wetlands, which are generating around 944 crores per annum. Similarly, we have another reservoir, small reservoir, which generates only 2.20 crores. So totally, if all the wetlands are being maintained properly, then these wetlands are capable of generating around 11,283 crores per annum, which is a very huge number. This is just 141 wetlands. We have not tried putting a monetary value on all the 42,000 wetlands, which is a kind of cumbersome activity, but we are indeed into it. But these 141 wetlands themselves are able to generate 11,283 crores. But in reality, these wetlands are not being maintained. And as a result, we have lost huge amount of ecosystem services. So the potential value is just 11,639 crores. But the actual value, the SAFON study, Salim Ali School study, have actually documented what is the present level of ecosystem services being generated by these wetlands. But they have found that most of these wetlands are defunct, and as a result, the level of ecosystem services coming from this wetland is very limited, which is equivalent to only 1,343 crores. So there is a kind of net loss of 10,297 crores per annum. That is because of the fact that we are not maintaining these wetlands properly, assuming that these are all wastelands. And therefore, future agricultural development, rural development depend largely on how effectively we manage small water bodies at the local level. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Venkatachalam. It's very inciting, and I think the values is quite mind-boggling. So may I request Priscilla Marimo, who is currently working in Bioversity International. She will be speaking to us on gender dimension in agrobiodiversity management. Priscilla has been with CGR system quite some time, and she has been working on the gender issues for quite a long time. She is at the moment working on the banana breeding process, being a participatory varietal selection methodology, and she was also a research manager previously at Center for Study of Developmental Economics in Northwestern University, US, and a research fellow at African Center for Gender, that is United Nations Economic Commission for Africa in Ethiopia. So over to you, Priscilla.
Thank you very much. Let's see what's happening here. Sorry, just can you see my?
Yes, the presentation is on the screen.
Just press the F5.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Hope you're well and safe. Thanks for the invitation to participate. It is a great pleasure to be part of the panel. I will talk about gender dimensions in agrobiodiversity. This presentation was prepared by myself and a colleague, Marlene, whom some of you know, who unfortunately could not join us due to time differences. So whenever I'm asked to discuss about gender, I always like to have this slide on because particularly mainly to highlight and eliminate the misconception that gender equals women, and to remind all of us that actually takes into account the tasks, the roles of different social groupings in society and their interaction, and goes beyond that binary distinction. So please keep this in mind throughout the presentation and even beyond. Okay, I can't get to my next slide. Okay. Sorry. So in recent decades, there's been increased recognition of the importance of promoting gender equality, not only as basic human right, but also as a fundamental condition for sustainable development. This is reflected in international conventions, such as the Convention on Biological Diversity, and also in the 2030 agenda. Specifically, if we look at SDG 5, it aims to empower all women and girls, but also across the SDGs, there are several references to gender equality and women's empowerment. But what exactly does gender have to do with biodiversity, and why is it important? Well, access to resources, perceptions, and other dimensions in agrobiodiversity management are often gendered. So to be able to inform program design at all levels, it is essential to understand the gender dynamics and using gendered analysis, collecting sex disaggregated data, using participatory approaches, as has been mentioned by my fellow panelists. And also it is important to go beyond the binary men versus women, but also assess these other intersectional factors and variables such as age, ethnicity, religion, and so forth. So I'll go over some of the dimensions in more detail in the next slides. So cultural norms and beliefs often assign distinct roles and responsibilities to women and men, including in biodiversity use and management. As a result, men and women might develop different, but also complementary sets of knowledge and skills, as well as distinct priorities in terms of management. Sometimes women, other vulnerable groups, may not be able to equally influence decision-making processes related to management or get equitable share of benefits derived from biodiversity. I'll go over these dimensions in more detail, but two important points I want to make here is that the gender division of labor is dynamic. it can change over time and space. For example, in some regions, labor burdens are shifting due to high male-out migration. Rural women have to take on additional farming and resource management responsibilities. Gender roles can also vary depending on other social factors. For example, in some families, young women and girls now have heavier burdens or responsibilities compared to older women or their mother-in-laws. Poorer women and poorer men may have different experiences regarding biodiversity management than the wealthier groups in our societies. So this needs to be taken into account. So now to go into detail to some of these dimensions. When we look at roles and responsibilities, in most rural contexts, there is a gender division of labor, as I've mentioned before. Women might typically have responsibilities related to seed management, storage, food processing, and preparation. Men maybe might be tasked to focus more on, construction, repair of houses, shelter for animals, cash crop production. So conservation initiatives need to be gender responsive. Otherwise, they can augment or increase the work burden of women or any other social groups without necessarily providing them with the appropriate benefits. When looking at biodiversity loss, it might also affect women and men differently and influence their ability to fulfill some of these gender-specific roles we've mentioned. For example, if women rely on a particular species for cooking and that species is lost, it might affect their ability to be able to cook nutritious foods for the household. Professor Darshan mentioned the intersection of agrobiodiversity and health and nutrition, and I think it's something that we really need to take into consideration when looking at some of these things. When you look at access and access to resources, customary laws and formal policies shape women and men's access to and control over natural resources. In many countries, women's basic rights to productive resources, such as land and other natural resources, is still lacking. According to OECD's Social Institutions and Gender Index, and this is a report from 2019, customary practices and laws of 123 countries out of the 180 that they had in their sample still restrict women's rights to access land. And in many contexts, women have limited access to agricultural services, information, markets. So lack of secure access to these resources might mean that men and women might experience different vulnerabilities to biodiversity losses. When it comes to knowledge, due to the gender differentiated roles and responsibilities and unequal access to resources, men and women tend to acquire and maybe develop different knowledge about plant and animal species, their uses, how to manage them, and often knowledge is passed.
Another 2 minutes, please.
Okay. But now with urbanization, are we at risk of losing some of these? My fellow panelists mentioned the importance of indigenous and local knowledge, and Professor Darshan highlighted undocumented foods by ethnic communities. How do we harness this knowledge and patent it in a way that it can be useful for the future? When it comes to gendered priorities, all the factors that I've mentioned above can result in differences between men and women in terms of preferences and priorities. In many contexts, women have less decision-making power over community resources, resource management and conservation than men. And when we look at decision-making, we can probably borrow from this ladder that Agawal mentioned, that Agawal came up with. It helps us to conceptualize these different levels of interaction. As you move up the ladder, the ability to exercise voice and influence increases until one reaches full empowerment. Often, research has shown a positive correlation between women's participation in local resource management and conservation outcomes. And in higher levels of decision-making in most fields, women remain underrepresented. If you look at ministers and policymakers, there's still a gap. When it comes to benefits sharing, with both decision-making power, it can become challenging to influence the types and distribution of benefits that emerge from biodiversity conservation. So to maybe in some of what I've been talking about, this social equity framework brings together the discussed elements to show how programming focused on biodiversity can enhance equity by, first recognizing that marginalized group, women are stakeholders in biodiversity management. And once these groups are recognized as valid stakeholders, there's need for representation, ensuring that they have rights and can participate in decision-making, not just in numbers, but with active input, voice, and influence. And then also promote more equitable distribution of these benefits. So these three elements, recognition, the distribution and representation, can make it easier to think of maybe gender responsive initiatives and make it possible to monitor gender impacts of initiatives against these dimensions. And then lastly, biodiversity interventions can either reinforce or challenge inequalities. We need all hands on deck and cross-cutting, multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary efforts looking at breeding, nutrition, socioeconomics, using artificial intelligence, as it has been mentioned, to make sure that gender responsive interventions are implemented at all levels. And I'll stop at that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it has been quite insightful, diverse presentations that you have made. And thank you very much for taking time and also making efforts to make it really attractive. I find in chat box there are 2 questions to Dr. Carlos Fadda. Did you pick up those questions, Carlo?
Let me go up.
There are 2 questions as far as I can see. One is traditional varieties fare well on parameters of ecological sustainability, are culturally acceptable and are socially inclusive in terms of recognizing traditional farming, and also offer genetic pool of anticipatory research in the context of climate change. But how do they fare from economic viability lens
Yes.
for the conserver farmer? What has been your experience? How do we resolve this ecology-economy trade-off?
Yeah, I think that is one of the issues that I highlight in one of the second slide of my presentation. I mean, it's really important that the paradigm, the economic paradigm, that there is new type of doing entrepreneurship. There is a lot of discussion about corporate social responsibility, about developing local businesses based on circular economy. And I think there is a need to provide a space for this type of products. There is surely an increased interest and an increased market for traditional crops in many parts of the world for healthy food. People are more and more realizing that eating healthy food is important, and agrobiodiversity is really a backbone of the healthy food. So I think there is a good potential to develop marketing strategy around this food type. But that needs to be supported. I mean, a lot of business to be created, they need incentives, they need, for example, access to finance, etc., etc. And of course, a lot of this work and a lot of the conservation of agrobiodiversity is done by smallholder farmers who generally lack access and training and capacity to develop this kind of business model. So it really requires a lot of, a large platform with a number of stakeholders spanning from policymakers, financial institutions, extension service, research, etc., to really support farmers in developing entrepreneurship around this topic. I think the second question was from Dr. Rajev from ICRISAT. I think the issue of productivity is really an important one. And generally, I mean, of course, when you develop a variety under good conditions, and on station, it's very hard to find that traditional varieties can compete in terms of productivity with these varieties. But when you move the experiments and out of the ideal conditions for which the varieties have been developed, then you can see that the viability of these varieties lose out. Our work was mainly done in marginal areas, so areas for which those varieties are not necessarily working well. And in those conditions, under those conditions, the yield of the traditional varieties were significantly better than the one of the improved varieties. And it's only because of the G by E interaction, because of the management aspects. Farmers may not have access to the fertilizer required. So otherwise, I agree with you. I mean, we, as part of the work that we did in Ethiopia, we identified a set of these, if you want, superior traditional varieties. We crossed with improved lines, and we tried to develop recombinant inbred lines that combine the two gene pool. But I think I wouldn't say it's a standard to say yield is not good. Yield may be good under certain conditions. There is another element is yield stability. These traditional varieties may still be outperformed by improved lines in good years, but good years are becoming also very rare. Now you have a good year every 5 years, 3 years, 7 years in certain location. And when you have the bad years, then traditional varieties still outperform the improved line. So when you also have this time consideration, you have an increase in yield over a 5 years time horizon, for example.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And there are two questions to Dr. Shantanu. I think one is just we have to accept the question from Subhash of ICAR, IAFSR. The question to Shantanu is 2 points need to be considered. Science and resource availability based on diversification is the need of the hour. And second is on science-based farming systems with 3 to 4 components or enterprise should be promoted at the agroecological zones. Do you agree, right, Shantanu? Can we hear Shantanu or what's it? I think we have lost him.
Thanks, Shantanu. I can see he's speaking, but we cannot hear him.
Yeah. So maybe we'll go to the question to Dr. Shankar, Darshan Shankar. Ayurvedic principle focus on Vata, Pitta, Kapha, which do not exist in the biochemical basis of food analysis in modern science. How do we reconcile this? Are you online, Darshan?
No, yes, I am there online. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Am I audible?
Yes, please.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible. Please go ahead.
Yeah. You know, I mean, we are, I think we are moving slowly into an era in education where I think in India we have begun to talk about it. I don't know about other parts of the world to what extent, but we are moving into an era of really transdisciplinary education. Education in schools and universities is almost entirely based on Western cultural, intellectual traditions. So without, you know, passing any, I mean, they've got good knowledge there in the Western cultural, intellectual tradition. But every culture has generated knowledge. And the universities of the future have to look at ways in which multiculturality, just like in agriculture, we have realized that monoculture doesn't work. And, you know, so similarly in education, monoculture is slowly going to be supplemented, complemented, no longer in dominance. And you will have transdisciplinarity. And so, yes, Kapha, Vata and Pitta come from a different worldview, and they don't have a one-to-one correlation with biochemistry. But in India, for example, where we have published papers in Nature on the area of what we call genomics, which is showing the relationship of the phenotypes which are characterized by the Kapha Vata Pitta variability, and underlying these phenotypes are unique genotypes. So today you have that correlation between Kapha Vata Pitta and genetics, not yet in terms of biochemistry, but in terms of genetics and in the context of food. And I think that's the next question that someone has asked me, that, how do you do mass personalization? I think the key to mass personalization is to create a new kind of cross-cultural database on food. Today, databases on food are only about food chemistry. Now, food chemistry is not sufficient to understand the nutritional value of a food. All of food chemistry is in vitro, it's not in vivo. There is very little of nutrition or biochemistry, food biochemistry or nutrition, very little knowledge on that. But you have also a great deal of traditional knowledge on food pharmacology, which is all in vivo. And so if you build databases where on the same food, you can assess the food in terms of its chemistry. Chemistry is useful, but it's not sufficient to understand nutrition, because chemistry, protein, carbohydrates, fats, etc., don't translate into the same proportion of nutrition when they are consumed, because it all depends on the metabolism of the person, on the genetics of the person, on the physiological makeup of the person. And so they get transformed depending on this, and a great deal of variability. So food chemistry is totally misleading. It is insufficient to understand food. So you've got to create a database which is integrative. That's the key. And we are in our university creating such a database, that on every food we have chemistry, you have modern nutrition, you have in Indian context Ayurveda, pharmacology, you have sensorials and so on and so forth. And therefore you can look at a food from all these different perspectives, not necessarily only from the perspective of chemistry and biology. So that's the key. And if you use machine learning and artificial intelligence, we can actually create, and we are working on this project, you can create, in India we all know about the Aadhaar card, which is your unique identity. It corresponds to what in America they call the social security number or something, which is unique. Now you can create a food card for every individual. If you know the phenotype of the individual, and the phenotype immediately links up to the kind of food that is suited to that phenotype. So you can do a mass personalization program if you combine, if it's transdisciplinary frameworks of knowledge, and you use artificial intelligence, you use machine learning, you can produce a database that will help an individual to recognize his phenotype in no time, and then link it to the individualized kind of food that he needs, where the food is assessed based on a transdisciplinary knowledge framework. So it may sound a little complex, but it's absolutely doable. It's a great project of the 21st century, mass personalization of food. I hope I've answered the two questions that were asked.
Yes, I think it was wonderful, and it also raises a lot of expectations from the people who are listening to you as to various other things. So I'll stop at that and request Priscilla. There is a question on migration. I mean, the question is, migration could be an important factor that explains differences across countries where household responsibilities impact women's roles, and they are less likely to engage in large-scale agrobiodiversity projects, plantations, and related terrains. How is these being addressed? Are there some useful examples to share? Priscilla, are you online? Hi. Could you get the question? Should I repeat?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I was on mute.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an important question, especially looking at the economic climate that we're living in at the moment. In many regions of the world, people are migrating. Most of them are men who are moving for a better life or to be able to provide for the family. But yeah, that leaves probably a burden to women and the youngsters, because even the youth are also living, to women and children who are perhaps left in some of these areas. So what does this mean when it comes to agrobiodiversity and like the question asks, when it comes to big plantations, what can be done? Are there useful examples out there? I think FAO has done quite a bit of work on this, but I think the most important thing is, understanding the context. One size does not fit all. So we have to go into these communities and find out what specifically a certain community needs. And in terms of what can be done, are there perhaps incentives that can be put in place to ensure that people remain in some of these areas that they are migrating out from? Are there maybe technologies that can be developed? If we harness all this information that we have and all this knowledge that we have, all these universities, we have so much that we can draw in from. So perhaps there could be certain technologies. I don't have examples of that, but I'm just pointing out some areas that maybe we could look at and try to make sure that we still keep and manage the agrobiodiversity. So yeah, looking at technology and also looking at incentives. And also there's been work, I guess that has been done, which has looked at payments for ecosystem services. So that's one incentive that can be used. And I think in some of those studies, it has shown that, women are more compliant versus men. But yeah, those are some of the things that maybe can be used to ensure that we maintain agrobiodiversity. I hope I answered the question.
Thank you, Priscilla. I think thanks already come to you from the person who asked you the question. So this last question from Dr. Vasudev. A worldwide ex situ conservation of the agro-biodiversity has been on the rise, perhaps at its maximum. However, the utilization of these concerned accessions by different stakeholders is relatively poor. Should we worry a new mechanism that encourages its utility? Maybe Carlo can take it up. Carlo?
Yeah, I think it's really, that's true. And the problem is that even when you look at the fundings of conservation, there are a lot of efforts with Svalbard and other ex situ facilities to conserve genetic resources. There are still ongoing a lot of collecting mission. The big problem is the utilization. And for example, in most of Africa, I'm not sure about the statistics for Asia, but in most of Africa, when you look at national gene banks, at most 10% of the accessions are characterized. So it's like as if you enter into a library and you see, I don't know, in Ethiopia, they had 90,000 accessions of many crops. You see 90,000 books, and only for 9,000 you have the title and you know what the books is about. And maybe among those 9,000 you don't have the title that you're looking for. So I think there should be a greater effort and greater investment to really characterize this material from different perspectives, because only if you know what you are conserving you can use it and it becomes useful for production system, for breeding, for adaptation to climate change, for nutrition, you name it.
Thank you very much, Carlo. And it has been an exciting experience to conduct this meeting. Of course, I was ably, in fact, I was always in the background, but I think I came to the foreground because I was in Chennai. I'm in Chennai, and the two colleagues who are the masterminds of this program are Dr. Oliver King, who is based in Namakkal in Tamil Nadu, and the other person is Dr. Anil Anil Kumar, he is in Wayanad in Kerala. So I heartily thank them, very profusely for making all these a grand success, and I'm thankful to many, all the panelists who raised a lot of questions and also a lot of expectations from the audience on various intriguing questions. Thank you very much. And if there is any particular remark any panelist want to make just in a minute, then I would give that minute to any person. If there are none, I think
Dr. Shantanu is trying to speak.
Yeah, but we can't hear him. Sorry, Shantanu, we can't really hear you. I don't know what is really the issue. Can you check your card?
Maybe you have to recheck in.
Yeah.
Rajmanikam, can you help?
Can you help?
Sir, I think you are in unmute only. Just replug. That's only.
Dr. Shantanu, can you replug it? That's what they are suggesting.
Can you go out and rejoin this meeting? Then it's a better option.
You have to click and rejoin. That's the only way, I think. Yeah.
Okay. In that case, thank you so much, all panelists, and it has been an exciting discussions. And thank you very much.
Can I make a remark? Sorry.
Who is it?
Yeah, it's Priscilla.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that, there are many resources that are available in terms of manuals, guidelines, and people to support gender-responsive interventions. Like I'd mentioned before, this work needs a collaborative effort. There's the alliance with a gender team that works across the organization on various cross-cutting issues such as climate change, migration, natural resource management. I work on banana breeding, trying to incorporate the socioeconomic elements in there. And we are open to share these resources and also for any partnerships for anyone who might be interested in this work and any other work related to agriculture, basically.
Thank you for your gesture, Priscilla, and I think it has been wonderful discussing with you all on various topics, particularly the agro-biodiversity and the future of it and the prospects of it. Thank you so much, and as the moderator, I say thanks and I close this event at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you.